So now our recording has started and I am sharing my screen. Does everybody see the Eau Claire Community Foundation homepage
Yes.
on your
We do.
screens? All right,
Mhm.
excellent. So this is your starting point, especially if you're not familiar with our grant processing. I just wanted to show you this. This is our main page, eccfwi.org. And you can always log into the grant module from the upper right-hand corner where it says grants login. There's also our main page, grant opportunities. So if you hover over lasting impact and then click on grant opportunities, this gives you information about all our grant options that we have through our foundation. The one that we're especially concerned with today is the community grant cycle, which is the one that's currently active. We're accepting applications for the cycle till noon on January 19th, which is a Friday. And it used to be a midnight deadline, so take note of that change. If you're one of the last minute people, which many of you are, that it's due at noon rather than midnight on the 19th. We also have a couple of other grant cycles that I'll mention briefly in case you're interested in the future. Women's Giving Circle grant cycle was formed by a group of women that came together to pool their money into a fund. They have their own grant cycle that opens April 1st and will accept applications till mid-June. Those grants are currently up to $7,000 for programs that benefit Eau Claire area women and children. So if you have any requests that fall in those parameters, that might be worth checking out at some point in the future. And I'm certainly happy to stay on the call after the main part if you have any questions about that. But since it doesn't apply to all nonprofits, I will keep going for now. Another option is the Royal CU and ECCF Nonprofit Professional Development Grant Cycle. That will be accepting applications this fall, and that this year it's going to be grants of up to $500 to help nonprofits pay to send their staff and board members or volunteers to professional development opportunities. Again, that might not be relevant to everybody, but if you're interested, that might be worth checking out as well. An option that's always available to you is to submit a letter of request because we have a lot of funds that are donor advised, which means the donors can recommend grants to nonprofits of their choice at any time. So if you have a funding need at your organization that isn't directly relevant to the community grant cycle, or that falls outside the timeline for any of our current grant cycles, you can write a 1 to 2 page letter of request. And then what we would do is share it with the holders of donor advised funds who might be interested in supporting that request. It's not a guarantee of funding, but it might be a good option for you if you have an urgent need that's outside of a grant cycle, or maybe one that's too large for a normal grant cycles. And then there's information about the grant training. The recording will be posted in the section, and reporting and publicity guidelines are available as well. Any questions at this point? In that case, I'm going to show you the community grant cycle. This has information about the 3 types of grants that this grant cycle offers. Bear in mind that each nonprofit can only choose one of these 3 types per grant cycle. So you're going to have to look at the descriptions, figure out your funding needs, and figure out which one is the best match. First option is program grants. That is for ongoing programs or services that you provide to community members. Asset grants are one and done type purchases or upgrades. So it could be a direct purchase like a computer or a copier, or it could be a website upgrade, for example. But if you need a thing, asset is a good option for you. Operations grants are a fairly new addition to our options. We're not big enough to provide large and multi-year grants at this point, but for now, our operations grants are requests of up to $10,000 for nonprofits that are meeting a temporary rough patch. So for example, a major fundraiser for your organization was canceled unexpectedly, or you're providing meals and the food costs have skyrocketed due to supply chain issues, or for example, your executive director left and you're scrambling to find a new person. For any situations like that where you have an increased funding need or lost revenue, that is something that you'll be able to get through if you get some extra support during this current rough patch. Operations are an option for you. Bear in mind, they're not intended as ongoing support, but they are intended to help you keep your doors open through an unusually difficult time. This is the only type of application that has a maximum. So currently operations grants can be up to $10,000. So if you need less than that, you can certainly apply for less, but 10,000 is the max. Program and asset don't have maximum requests. That said, it's pretty rare for requests of 10,000 or more to be fully funded. As our foundation grows, it's getting a little more common. We've had more $10,000 plus grants in the last few years than I have seen since I started here. But bear in mind that the reviewers look at large requests really carefully because they're usually about 50 or 60 applications competing for a limited pool of money. So if they're going to allocate or recommend funding for a really large request, you have to really do a good job showing why you need every one of those dollars and what kind of impact it's going to have on the Eau Claire community. Any questions at this point? All right. Then I just want to talk briefly about the three kinds of funds that support our grant cycle, because those will be relevant for you as a grant writer. The bulk of the community grant cycle is funded by what's called unrestricted grants. That's where a donor starts a fund with us and says, use it for the community's greatest needs. So our grant reviewers, they know how much money they have available in that pool of funds, and they can use those unrestricted dollars to recommend funding for the applications that they feel will have the biggest benefit on the community. So those are our friends during this grant cycle. However, another relevant one when you're writing your grant application to bear in mind is field of interest. That is where a donor has an interest in a certain area, for example, animals or the environment or fitness. But they don't have a specific organization. They just want to generally support applications in that field. So that's when they start field of interest funds with us. And you could see on the community grant cycle information, there's a link to field of interest funds for grant applicants. If you click on that, you'll see a list of the funds that we have and brief descriptions. This is definitely worth your time to go through when you're writing a grant application, because our grant reviewers are tasked with matching the available field of interest funds with applications that they think would be a good fit for them. It's kind of like playing Love Connection as a grant reviewer. You will see on your application, there's a field of interest fund question. So if you look at this list and you see a fund that you think would be a good fit for whatever you're asking for, definitely include that on the field of interest fund question on your grant application. It doesn't guarantee funding, but it can give you a competitive advantage. So if the reviewers are trying to decide between two really fabulous applications and they're torn, but one has a relevant field of interest fund and one doesn't, listing that field of interest fund might tip the balance in your favor. So I would highly recommend that you take the time to go through the list of these funds. The third kind of fund that's directly relevant to you as a grant writer is donor advised funds. These are what I had mentioned when I talked about letters of request, where donors start a fund and they want to be able to have say in what nonprofits get the money. They can recommend money from their funds at any time. So what happens during each grant cycle is that our donor advisors get a list of all our grant requests, and they read over that and they might say, oh, YMCA, I love the YMCA, I want to fund that. Or Stand in the Light, I totally believe in Stand in the Light, I want to pitch in money to that. And then they can recommend full or partial funding of your grant request, depending on how much money they have available in their funds. Oftentimes, there are applications that get fully funded before the reviewers ever even see them. All the announcements of funding won't be made until they're approved by our Board of Trustees at their April meeting. So you won't know if you got funded by a donor advisor until everybody else finds out the results in early May. But it's very possible that your application could get funded before the reviewers even look at it. Conversely, we do have some donor advisors who like to look at the list of unfunded and partially funded grants after the grant cycle is done. So if worst comes to worst and you submit an application but you don't get full funding for it, don't despair, because we will keep your application on file, and it could be that a donor advisor will come in after the fact and say, ooh, I really wanted to see that one get funded. I'm going to pitch in money now. So just because even if the grant result isn't all that you had hoped, that's not necessarily the end of the line. You could get funded by a donor advisor later. Any questions at this point? All right, in that case, I want to go over our grant making guidelines, which are very important, especially for those of you who are newer to our foundation. There's a link for that on the grant opportunities page under the community grant cycle information that takes you to this document. First thing it goes over is our 4 giving categories. So our applications all ask you to select one of the 4 categories. And it could be that your application is relevant to more than one. For example, you might be teaching kids about environmental things, in which case it's both Form Features and Give Green. We do ask that you select only one of those. So select the one that is the best fit, even if it's not necessarily the only fit. This won't affect your funding eligibility, but what it does is help me divide the workload among the grant reviewers, because every year we get 50 or 60 applications, and we have 16 or 20 grant reviewers who are all community volunteers. So they all have jobs and kids and demands on their time. So we can't possibly ask them to read all 50 or 60 applications. So what I do when the applications come in is divide them into 4 subcommittees, and I use these categories to help divide the workload among them. That said, offer opportunities is our biggest category. It's basic needs, food, shelter, medical care, things like that. So if you have an application that could be relevant to offer opportunities, but also one of the other 3, create culture, which is arts, museums, literature, Form Futures, which is education and training, or Give Green, which is animal fitness and the environment. I would suggest selecting one of the first 3, just because those tend to be underrepresented compared to offer opportunities. Again, that doesn't guarantee funding, but our grant reviewers do tend to try to support all 4 of the categories. And so if you have a request that could qualify as both offer opportunities and one of the other 3, it might give you a slight advantage to select Create Culture, Form Futures, or Give Green for your application. Any questions at this point? Then the next thing I want to take you to is the applicant dashboard. So you can access this through the upper right-hand corner of our website. It appears on all the pages. It says grants login, or you could do apply here on the community grant cycle information page under grant opportunities. Either way, you'll come to a dashboard that looks like this. If you are an organization that has already submitted grants in the past, you'll see information about any currently active requests you have going for other grant cycles, and also requests that you've submitted in the past. You'll have access to those as well. Since this is just a demo, I don't have any information here. You can apply either at the top or in this line. Both of them take you to the same place, which is listing of the current active grant cycles. Most of the ones available are community grant cycle, so the asset, the program, and the operations. You'll also see an Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation application. They are a supporting organization of the Eau Claire Community Foundation, but they're a whole separate entity, and they're specific to requests from the Eau Claire Area School District. So unless you work for a school, this one probably isn't going to be directly relevant to you at this point. The 3 community grant cycle applications asset, again, that's for a specific purchase, an item or an upgrade. Program is for ongoing services, and operations, as I mentioned, is to help your organization keep its doors open through a temporary rough patch from lost revenue or increased expenses. You're going to pick one of these 3. Unfortunately, we can't accept more than 1 application per organization in each grant cycle. So select the one that is the best fit for your needs and then click apply on that one. Just so you know, if you have applications in for other grant cycles, say Women's Giving Circle or the Nonprofit Professional Development, or if you have a letter of request submitted, that doesn't affect this. You can still apply for one of the community grant applications. Once you click apply, you're going to be taken to the form. I'm clicking on program right now because that's kind of the most general one. One option that's available is copy previous answers. If you have submitted a similar application in the past, you can certainly do that. For questions like the organization mission statement, for example, that generally won't change from year to year. However, if you do that, make sure that your current application isn't exactly like your previous application, because reviewers will be looking at previous grants that your nonprofit has received. And if they feel that the current application is very similar to something you got funded for in the past, they might see it as ongoing operating expenses, which our foundation doesn't fund. So make sure that your request is significantly different from requests that you have submitted in the past. Or if it's similar, that you show, for example, that you've significantly expanded the scope of your program or done something different with it, so that they know it's not just an ongoing expense that you would be paying whether or not you got this grant. Another feature I want to point out is Collaborate in the upper right-hand corner. This is going to allow you to invite other people to help on your application. You can invite anyone that you want. You type in their email address. You set their permissions. So you could do it so they can only view what you wrote. They can edit it if you want them to help you proofread, for example, or you could give them permission to submit that application as well. If you are, for example, inviting your executive director to do a final look through and then do the submission on your organization's behalf. And you can write a message there as well. You're not required to use the Collaborate feature, but it's a handy tool that you might want to take advantage of if you want to have other people check your work or give suggestions or make sure that all the budget items add up, for example. Any questions at this point? All right, in this case, I'm going to just briefly take you through the application. For all 3, you're going to give your request a title just as a brief summary of what the request is asking for. That shouldn't be more than 5 or 10 words. Organization description, you're going to do kind of an elevator speech there for reviewers who might not be familiar with your organization or its work. Just imagine you're in an elevator with somebody who's never heard of your organization before and you have 30 seconds to describe it. That's the kind of thing you want to put here, just enough to get the reviewers an idea of what you do. If you're using a fiscal sponsor, you also need to describe its relationship to your organization. And for those of you unfamiliar with that, a fiscal sponsor is an organization that agrees to accept grants on behalf of organizations that don't have tax exempt status. So for example, if your organization doesn't have a 501c3, but you're in the process of getting one from the IRS, you could ask another organization to serve as your fiscal sponsor in the interim. like I said, you will need to describe its relationship to your organization because the grant check will be made out to them, not to your organization. And you'll be asked to upload a letter of support from the fiscal sponsor just to confirm that they're on board with accepting the check for you. Next thing is the nature and purpose of the grant request. Again, an elevator kind of speech about what you're asking for and why you need the money for that purpose. So this will just give your reviewers a general overview of what you're looking for. And the dollar amount you're asking for, that's not necessarily the cost of the whole program, but just what specifically you want the Eau Claire Community Foundation to kick in. And here's where you put field of interest funds. If you see any of those that might be relevant to your request, you can type them in here. That's not a required field, but it could give you an advantage if you find some that are relevant. Again, you're going to be asked to select one of the 4 giving categories, select the best one, even if it's not, your application is relevant to more than one, just choose one there. Next question is target population. This is very important for all 3 types of application because the mission of the Eau Claire Community Foundation is to serve nonprofits in Eau Claire County. So you need to show the reviewers that these dollars that they allocate for you are going to have a significant benefit to people in Eau Claire County. If you have some clients that come in from other counties, like say you have a few from Dunn or Chippewa, for example, that's not a deal breaker, but you need to be able to show the reviewers that at least half of the grant's impact is going to benefit Eau Claire County residents or landscapes. There's a new question on all 3 types of application this year because our board has asked us to collect information on lives impacted. This is a really difficult one because there's no way to do it really scientifically, but just as a rule of thumb, if you have a specific number of people you're serving, include those. And you can also include people that are directly impacted through the impact on the first set of people. For example, if you're doing an after-school program, you could say you're serving 20 kids through that, but it also benefits their parents and siblings because it gives them a place to go after school. So you could include the family members in the count of lives impacted there. Probably don't go too far out because there's always a ripple effect for any thing that you're doing for the community, but just include first and second degree people directly or indirectly impacted by whatever you're asking to do through this grant. And again, this isn't going to be scientific at all, but it'll help give the reviewers have a sense of the scope of your impact. And it will help us for reporting as well. Another thing that's important is the grant period eligibility, because the grant awards will be announced in early May of the year in which the awards are made. So May 2024 this year. The board meeting where all the grants are approved occurs at the very end of April. So as soon as the board has approved the grants, I can start informing applicants of the results. So you'll find out in very late April or very early May if you got funded. The grant period is technically June 1st to June 1st. Awards used to be made at our annual meeting in early June, where all the grantees would come and receive their checks there. We're not doing the annual meeting anymore. It's been combined with our autumn social in the fall. So your checks will be mailed to you once the awards have been made and the checks have been printed. So if you get your check in say mid-May and you're ready to start spending it, it's not a huge issue if you start spending it a little early, but the bulk of your grant should be spent between June 1st and of the year it's awarded and June 1st of the following year. I know sometimes things happen and you can't use all the money as intended within that grant period. You do have the option of requesting a grant extension. So what you would do in that case, if you know you can't spend the money as intended by June 1st, you can write a letter to our board And I would post that for approval, and the board would say, oh, sure, they can have some extra time to spend that. But that would need to be done at least 60 days before the end of the grant period to give our board enough time to vote on that extension. Another option too, that has affected some nonprofits in the past, say you ask for an item like a computer, and then another funding source unexpectedly purchases that computer for you, so you don't need the original grant request anymore. You could ask our board to redirect the dollars into something similar. So in that example, say you got the first computer funded, but you could use a second one, you could write a letter of request to redirect the funds, and then that would be posted for our board to approve, and then I would inform you of the results as soon as they had a chance to vote on that. Again, please do that at least 60 days before the end of the grant period, so our board has time to vote on that. Any questions about that? Right, and then the main bulk of the application here, and these numbered questions are what the evaluators are going to be looking at the most carefully when they do their evaluations. They want to know your mission statement and how the grant proposal helps your organization meet its mission. They want to know the community needs and also how you identified and documented those needs. So if there are studies like the ALICE study, for example, or based on the number of people walking through your doors, or just tell them a little bit about how you determined that whatever you're asking for is a community need. Program differentiation, they also want to know how your program is different from what other nonprofits are doing. So for example, if you're a food pantry, how does your food pantry differ from others? Maybe you serve a different section of the town or a different demographic. That will help the reviewers understand why what you're doing is unique and different compared to what other organizations are doing. Collaboration, you're not required to collaborate, but it can only help your application if you do show collaboration, because the reviewers want to see that you're reaching out and forming networks to help strengthen the ongoing sustainability of what you're asking for. If you aren't collaborating with any other organizations or people, just briefly explain why your organization has the expertise and staffing to run the requested program on its own. Timeline, it's okay if you don't have every single date, but they are looking for a general timeline of major events. If you're running a program, when the major things that you're programming will happen. And if you're asking for an asset, they want to know when the asset is going to be purchased. And again, that doesn't have to be exhaustive, but just enough to give the reviewers a sense that you've really thought out what you are requesting. And program activities, this is kind of a vague question, but reviewers, again, want to have a general sense of what you're doing. So listen briefly describe up to 3 major program activities. This question isn't on the asset one because it's not relevant, but they want to know what kind of things you're doing if you're asking for a program. And then evaluation, all 3 types want to know how you're going to determine if your request has been successful. Are you going to administer surveys or keep track of the number of people served, or do some kind of before and after thing? So reviewers want to know how you will be able to tell if your program was successful or your asset purchase. Staffing, just briefly explain how your program will be staffed, or if you're purchasing an asset, how the people will be trained to use that asset. And then sustainability, they want to see that you have a long-term vision for how the impact of the program will continue even after the end of the grant period. Partial funding is also a very important question because, especially if you're asking for a really large amount, 10,000 or more, they might not be able to recommend full funding for it, but reviewers often want to do at least some support for requests. So they want to know if you could accept partial funding for that And if so, what your priorities are. So even if they don't have enough available funds to recommend funding for the whole thing, they can try to at least prioritize the most urgent needs. And this is very important. I asked our grant reviewers for suggestions for nonprofits. And one of our reviewers did say specifically, she really likes to see a well thought out plan on the funding priorities because it tells her that you've put a lot of thought into your application. And for the budget part, this is going to be similar through the other applications as well. Salary and benefits for program requests, especially, you can request salary benefits, but you need to explain how that are directly relevant to whatever program you're asking to fund. So if the reviewer sees salary and they feel like it's an ongoing expense, like say you're paying an executive director and you would have to pay that person whether or not you got the grant, reviewers will tend to be wary of it. But say you ask for $1,000 in salary and benefits and explain it's to pay for extra staff hours that will be required to implement this program that you're looking for funding for, then that would be an expense that would be permissible in the criteria of these grant applications. Contracted services, again, if you're hiring a third party to help provide something, you can request those dollars, but you have to show why those dollars are specific to your request and not for something that the organization is going to be using anyway. Again, because we don't do ongoing expenses. Supplies, advertising, and printing are pretty straightforward. Just explain how much you're asking for that and how the money would be spent. And then other expenses, if there are budget categories that just don't fit into those first three, you can include that there and explain it here. The clearer you can be on how the dollars you're requesting will be used, the better. That's one of the things the reviewer is looking at carefully. And one of the most frequent complaints in the past has been, well, I don't understand how our dollars are going to be used. So break down the budget as much as you can and show them where the money is going and why you need it for that purpose. And you're going to put the total ECCF funding, which is the sum of 1 through 4 here. So these are the grant dollars they're requesting. Make sure you put the same amount in this box as you did on the first page, because if there's a discrepancy between those two, the reviewers are going to be like, why are they asking us for the money on the first page, or are they asking us for this amount? So make sure to double check your application, make sure those two numbers are the same. The reviewers have also told me they like to see that your agency has what they want described as a skin in the game, that they are going to support this request either with money or volunteer hours or some kind of support. So estimate the value of your agency's contributions to the program. That can include volunteer hours, and you, in order to calculate that, you can use what like Google volunteer hours in Wisconsin. I think it was like 30 something an hour last time I checked it. As long as you show the reviewers what figure you're using to calculate volunteer hours, the value of that, you can put that as part of your agency contribution. And then other contributions, if you know you're getting another grant or donations from other supporters of your organization or any other sources of funding support, you can include that here and explain that. And then the total other sources of support would be the sum of numbers 1 and 2, your agency contribution and other contributions. And then the total program cost is total ECCF funding, which is what you're requesting from us, and total other sources of support, which is what your agency is kicking in. And that goes in this box. Previous Eau Claire Community Foundation grants, those would just be ones through competitive grant cycles, like the Community Grant Cycle or the Women's Giving Circle or the RCU. If your organization has gotten donor advised grants, so for example, if I have emailed you one day and said, hey, so-and-so recommended $1,000 grant to your organization, you don't have to include that, because for some nonprofits, you'd have to write a small novel to fit all those in. So our reviewers will just be looking for the competitive grants you have received in the past 3 years through the Eau Claire Community Foundation. And then the last section, application eligibility. They want you to verify that you've read the grant making guidelines, which go over the grant categories, the grant period, and also our non-discrimination. Make sure you look at that. It's kind of the standard boilerplate that a lot of nonprofits have. We don't discriminate based on gender or sexual orientation or race or religion or anything like that. If you have a request that's aimed at a specific population, so for example, if you're in Girl Scouts and obviously your program is serving girls, you just need to show that no girls within that target demographic will be discriminated against based on their religion or orientation or anything like that. Year of your organization's incorporation, when it started. Most of you will check yes on this one, that your organization's the same on your IRS letter. But if you have a DBA, doing business as, and so your request is on a different name than your IRS letter, just briefly explain that there. Fiscal year, most organizations run on a calendar year, January 1st to December 31st, but some are, for example, like June to June or something like that. So the reviewers just want to have a general sense of when your books open and close for the year. And then your organization's executive director or equivalent needs to check yes, that she or he has authorized this application. We'll take it on faith that you as a grant writer made sure that the leader of your organization is on board with this request. If you are in a school district, you would also need a letter from the superintendent just verifying that you have permission to run a program within the school. And then the uploads are the general boilerplate, the organization's overall budget, including expenses and revenues, your IRS letter that proves you're tax exempt, year-to-date financials, so that would be profit and loss, and also like what you had budgeted as opposed to what you actually spent. Board of directors, letter of support, which you did need for sure if you have a fiscal sponsor. They're not required in other cases, but it can only strengthen your application to have a letter of support from other groups or individuals. If you have more than one letter, please combine them into one PDF to upload them. And then your organization logo, because hopefully all of you will get grant funding. So we'll display those logos at the autumn social, which is combined with the annual meeting. And that's where we'll tell the audience members about our grant cycle this year and what grant recipients were receiving funds this year. And then once you have all this filled out to your satisfaction, you can do submit application in the lower right-hand corner. There's also a save application. This software does automatically save your writing every 30 seconds or whenever you move from field to field, but a lot of people feel better having a save application option if you can't finish the whole thing in one sitting. So you can certainly do that and then come back to it later. And that takes us through the entire application. I will stop sharing now, and if any of you have any questions or things that you'd like me to clarify, now is your chance.
I have a few questions.
Sure.
So first question is the different categories that you have, including the social opportunities and such, and the education, etc. Are there limited amounts of funds in each category, or is it one pool and they try to distribute it equally or amicably among all
Right.
the?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There is one pool of money, and that pool is mostly unrestricted dollars, plus whatever's available in the field of interest and any donor advised dollars that donors choose to kick in. Those three sources are the entire pool that the grant reviewers are working with when they recommend funding. And bear in mind that their recommendations are only that recommendations. It's the Board of Trustees that has to approve all of the grant funding for each year. The reviewers will try to get the dollars allocated as close to the proportion of the applications that were received as they can. But if there are applications that are really, really strong, they're going to get funded regardless of what category. And the main priority will be funding the strongest applications rather than just splitting the dollars among the categories.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll give someone else a chance to ask a question if they got one, and I have a couple more.
Sure. Kathy?
I always get confused with the questions members served. So we have the memory choir, and then I never know if like members served means just the people who have memory loss. Is it the whole choir, or is it the choirs and the choir members and their families? How do I differentiate those? And I know there were two parts that you could fill in.
Right. That's a really good question. I think you can for sure count the people with memory loss in the choir and the staff and volunteers of the Stand and Light, but you can also count their family members, because that's a huge benefit to the family members knowing that their loved one is able to participate in this.
Mhm.
So I think and obviously it's not scientific. We're not expecting you to like go knock on every door and survey every household about how many members there are, but just give the reviewers a ballpark figure, just so that they have a sense of how many people are directly and indirectly affected.
And then just a quick follow-up to that. Do we, or how do we like count audience? Those people are all affected.
Oh, that's a
They
really
could be
good
in the
question.
first original group, but do we put them in that second level? I can't remember what it was called right now.
Yeah, the indirectly affected. That's a really
Indirect.
good point. Yeah, and it does benefit them. I mean, because it's good music and it's heartwarming. So I think it would be kosher to include an estimate of your audience members as well when you put the lives impacted.
All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Also,
Thanks,
if
Bryce.
anybody ever wants to write a grant for me, I will bake you cookies. That's all I have to say there.
What kind of cookies are we talking?
You got to give them a song too, Kathy.
You name it. I'll bake the cookies.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. I actually have a question similar to Kathy's. So regarding the impact, obviously you have the initial and secondary levels, but it's difficult to just throw a number in there. And I know that the form only allows you to put a numeric value, nothing else. In the future, will there be a way to kind of delineate that? Not like non-required, but you know, if it's a particularly large number, it can kind of raise eyebrows. So if I have an educational program that's distributed online and you know, people around the world have access to it, and we have numbers in the thousands, then it kind of raises an eyebrow when it's just this kind of small educational program. So is there a way to supplement information in that regard so that it doesn't look like we're just making something up?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The number of lives impacted is just numeric, but target population would be where you provide that information. Because the main object of that question is to show the impact on Eau Claire. But in the case that you're talking about where there's a broader distribution, you can say, hey, this is the major benefit we're going to have on Eau Claire County, but it also goes beyond, and this is how many people are going to be affected and benefited beyond Eau Claire County in addition to the effect locally.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, if
So
there
I
are-
do have
Oh,
more
oh, sure.
questions. Sorry. I
Oh,
raised
no
my
problem.
hand a few times in the session and
Oh,
I
sorry.
don't know if it was showing up or not, but
Oh, no, I didn't see it. I gotta learn
so
Teams better.
so with an asset purchase, if there's the part in the budget saying your organization's contribution to this, the skin in the game, so
Uh-huh.
to speak, with an asset purchase, oftentimes they've delayed or not been able to purchase something because they just can't afford that chunk at a time.
Right.
Um, how do we delineate that and say we literally can't put money toward this because all of our efforts, all of our money is going into programming and staff and such. So how do we describe that if that dollar amount's close to zero?
Like as far as the agency contribution, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like if I'm just throwing a really silly example out here, if I need to buy a baseball bat for my little league team, and I literally can't afford a baseball bat because all my efforts, all my money is going into actually coaching and making sure that the kids are prepared in the teaching aspect.
Right.
It looks like I don't have any skin in the game. But the reality is that bat is necessary to play the game.
Yeah. Yeah. What you could do is put a low figure in the currency box, but then explain it in where the agency contribution box and say, hey, we don't have the resources to do this, but this is what we're accomplishing and this is where our current funding is going right now.
Okay. So if for instance there's a improvement on a property and we're
Right.
asking for one small part of that improvement, our skin in the game is saying we're making all these other improvements and we're just asking you to fund this one segment. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, use that text box to explain it. Any other questions? All right, well, in that case, I will end the recording here, but if you want to hang out and ask anything else, you're certainly welcome to. Otherwise, I thank all of you for coming today. I really appreciate your time. And I'm always here for you if any other questions arise as you are writing your grant applications. So thanks for coming and have a fabulous weekend.
Thank you,
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you, you too.